Well, good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. I'm Gene Perinack. Today is our 71st show. Hard to believe. We're going to get a screen share up here to take you through what's happening today. Once more, I'm on the road, but I'm joined by a great crew back home. Today, Friday, August 20th, we're going to do COVID Connect. As usual, we're going to talk about the COVID news and some local announcements. After that, I'm going to welcome my good friend Jim Medsker from Keystone Solutions Group, a turnkey design, development, and manufacturing group on the west side of the state of Michigan. After that, we'll have time for Q&A, either with Jim or on anything we've talked about on the show. And we'll have a good time today, so thank you for being here. First thing up, I want to remind you that the $2,500 quarterly pitch party is happening in the month of September. So, MedTech companies, this is not so much a competition. These companies are not all in the same vertical, but every pitch has elements that are good and bad or missing or there. And so what we want to do is compare these, contrast these, say who's doing what well. Our judges at the end of the pitch party will tip their hat towards one of those startups, and Into Being will pay that startup $2,500 prize, and we'll have a good time. We'll look forward to Q4 after that. But here's the plan for the pitch party. If you're a US-based MedTech startup, you can submit to pitchparty@medtechcrossroads.org. Send us your PowerPoint with the problem statement, vision, value proposition, team, milestones, your business model, your competitors, and your ask. What are you asking for and what are you going to use the money for? I remember we had a pitch party a few months ago where there was one blindingly brilliant ask where the presenter really got out there and said, this is exactly what this money is going to go for. And it was a really outstanding presentation. So at the end of September, our judges, Andy Rader from Evergreen M&A Partners, Dr. Nikki Kennedy, vascular surgeon and founder of Arbor Hive, Jim Medsker, who's on the show today, president of Keystone Solutions Group, and Stacy Frankovich, program manager for MedHealth, will reflect on the pitches that we hear during the month of September, and then we will go from there as they judge them. Okay, let's go to COVID metrics and vaccine distribution. Our data these days comes from covid.cdc.gov, and we've been following this really interesting picture from CDC on the state of Michigan, showing percent fully vaccinated versus case count. Cases per 100,000. And you're certainly seeing a lot of counties where the vaccination rate is low and the case count is high. You're also seeing quite a few counties in that dark purple where the vaccination rate is getting up there and the case count is high. There are even some counties where the vaccination rate is 50 to 100%. They haven't broken it down with enough granularity to see those higher percent vaccinated. So it's still not quite telling a consistent story, but it's interesting to watch nonetheless. New cases are coming up. Too early to say how high they will go, but they are coming up. Although this is a slight encouragement, we will see where this goes. The positivity rate is starting to plateau. Does that mean it's going to stay there? We don't know, but we will see where that goes. It has come up from its trough a month ago. Thankfully, and it may be premature to say this though, thankfully at the moment deaths are low, but as we know, deaths lag infections by at least 4 weeks. So we're going to see where this goes. Thankfully, that still shows good news today. Hospitalizations though climbing, and we've actually got some new graphs coming up here about national hospitalizations. We'll go to that in just a second. But hospitalizations starting to climb in the state of Michigan. We will see how high this goes. Vaccinations nationwide starting to barely creep up again. They hit a bottom around the beginning of July, but daily vaccinations starting to climb up again. And getting to transmission rates. The transmission rate in the state of Michigan, like we said it would, is going back towards red. And in fact, that's really the story for the entire country. I think this is the reddest we've ever seen the entire country. We're reaching a trough that is very much like that around the end of 2020. So transmission rate by county all over the country, basically a big block of red. We added this in this week because I think we all know that hospitalizations are still a major indicator as to how people are reacting and what the danger level is. And it was some number of months ago that some of our doctor friends informed us that most hospitals have to run around 80% capacity to stay profitable. So if you have 80 out of 100 beds filled, you're doing about right. But what that means is it only leaves you about 20 beds out of those 100 for surges. Well, any county here that's in dark red is 20 or more beds per 100. So if a hospital is hitting its profitability marks with about 80 beds filled, then it only has about 20 per 100 beds left. And that's why this is of concern in those states where this is hitting the bright or dark red. Because what it's saying is it's taking up those excess beds, and now the hospital has no beds left. So sometimes it's hard to parse what these surges mean to hospitals, where they need to run versus how much overhead they have or how much bandwidth they have. That's what this is showing. A large part of the South being taken up pretty completely. And so not good news in those parts of the country. That's the COVID news for today. All of the month of August, we have been talking about manufacturing. Manufacturing is really, really important. A lot of times we talk about MedTech development, and it's really fun to think about new intellectual property, about cool designs, about first prototypes. We talk a lot on the show about FDA clearance and things like that. But when it really comes down to it, until you've built those devices, you don't have a device to use. And to build them in quantity, and to be able to build them reliably and cheaply and in a way that works for the end user. So a question that we have for many of you, especially if you're a mentor of a startup or you're part of a company that's getting ready to move towards manufacturing, is, are you ready for manufacturing? Some of the things that happen that show you that you might not have been ready is if you're going to vendors and you're saying, I've got this great product, and they no quote you. They won't give you even the time of day to tell you how much it might cost or how long it might take. Or maybe you start production. You get a vendor and you start production, but then you have to stop production soon after starting manufacturing. Or maybe you're finding you have to have design engineers patrolling the shop floor because the design really wasn't mature enough to build. Or maybe the cost of goods is higher than you wanted it to be, higher than you expected, higher than you could be profitable at. All these are indications that maybe we weren't quite ready to start. And so we've been talking all month with Michigan-based manufacturers who do MedTech manufacturing and sometimes development, like our friends at Keystone, day in and day out. And today I want to welcome Jim Medsker, who's the founder and president of Keystone Solutions Group, back to the show. Jim, you can bring your audio and video on. There's the man himself. It's good to see you again, Jim.
Hello, Gene. Hello, everyone. Glad to be back.
We're so glad to have you. I just saw on, I think it was Facebook, that you guys just celebrated 24 years in business.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. It's actually a stunning statistic for me. It doesn't seem like it's been that long. Well, in some ways it does, but mostly it doesn't. Time flies when you're having fun, right?
Yes, it really does. And you know, things move and change. We just celebrated our 11th anniversary, and to me, it's like, how on earth did that all happen? But 24 years is a real achievement. And you guys, we're talking about manufacturing today, but Keystone is turnkey. You guys do all the way from napkin sketch, design, development, as well as production. And you have, well, I'd like you to tell us more about Keystone and all the things that you guys do before we get into the specifics that we're talking about today of design for manufacturing.
Sure. Would you like me to share the screen? I can go through that general
presentation. Yeah, go ahead, do that presentation.
Okay. Okay, is that showing up okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, welcome everyone. Happy Friday. I hope you're enjoying the weather. And Gene, I guess it's nice out where you are too, right? You're out west.
Yeah, we are out west enjoying the weather, and I won't tell you what it's like right here for fear that it might hurt people's feelings.
Might upset some people. So this is our 30,000-foot view. This is just an overview of Keystone, and we'll go through this. It kind of touches on the company, our values, our capabilities, and a multitude of other things. So let's get started. So if we were really pressed for time today, this would be the slide that we would go through. This sums up everything sort of as succinctly as we can. We are a turnkey development and contract manufacturing company. So we specialize in medical device development and manufacturing. Our biggest footprint is within the single-use disposable area. So procedural devices and things like that. Although I will say our the electromechanical segment of our business does continue to grow as well. So we do a lot of sourcing, assembly, packaging, help manage sterilization processes. And for certain clients, we also offer warehousing and distribution. And one of the things I want to touch on is if you were to take a tour of Keystone right now, you're not going to see much in the way of raw material conversion. So we're not a machine shop. We're not an injection molding facility or a sheet metal shop. Because we have, as Gene mentioned, we've been in business for 24 years. We've been a development firm for 24 years. We've been a manufacturing firm for about 13 years. Through all of that experience, we've amassed a large sourcing database, and we have a lot of experts in raw material conversion that we lean on. So we get components in, we do the assembly, the packaging, and sterilization. We are a privately held company here in Michigan, and we value long-term collaborative relationships. So sometimes the video works here and sometimes it doesn't. So we'll see here. So what this slide deck is going to go through, we're going to go through an overview real quick of Keystone. We're going to touch on our values, our proven process that gets you from a sketch on a napkin all the way through to a commercialized state, and also how we can serve you. So again, medical device development, manufacturing, and distribution. That is the core of what we do. Single use, electromechanical, a lot of assembly work, kitting. We do quite a lot of procedural kitting for wound care and other things. We are experts at packaging, sterile barrier packaging in particular. And we have a wide variety of sterilization methods that we manage. Now, we don't do sterilization in-house. Very few manufacturers do. However, we have several validations for especially EO gas type sterilization, and we have expertise in gamma as well. There at the bottom, you see we are ISO 1345 2016 certified. We are FDA registered, and soon I'll have to update this slide deck because we are now MDSAP certified. Well, we will be very, very soon. So we did pass the audit, so that's a good sign. So just to touch on a handful of the products and spaces that we play in, let's look at this next image here, imaging products. So we manufacture a wide range of imaging products that are used in X-ray, fluoroscopy, CT, MRI, and ultrasound. Diagnostic devices, this is one in particular for a company called C2DX. This is for compartmental pressure measuring. So this is a device that it's a small handheld electromechanical device. It has several subcomponents that are single-use disposable, and we do it all. We do the reusable portion as well as a single-use disposable. We have a number of products, both in development and in manufacturing, that are in the respiratory arena. The one that's shown here is for airway innovations. This is an anti-extubation device. So when you have tubes down your throat, you wake up from general anesthetic, your first inclination is to pull those out. Well, that's sort of dangerous. A lot of times there's an inflated balloon at the end of that tube. This is a device that helps keep you from doing that. On to the next slide here. We do a number of orthopedic kitting processes in-house for procedural kits. This is a neat one for fixation. This is called mini ties. This is for craniomaxillofacial. This is for jaw fixation. So if you've had trauma or have TMJ or other types of surgery where your jaw needs to be locked in place for several days, weeks, or months, this is far less traumatic than the standard of care, which has been out there for probably 100 years, which involves screws and wires and things that get drilled into your skull. This is literally a surgical grade zip tie that gets placed in between the gaps in your teeth, and it locks the jaw in place. Sample collection, obviously COVID has helped drive some of this. We've done millions of sample collection kits for COVID. Patient surfaces, so this one here is for pressure ulcer reduction and bed sores. That's been a very successful product. Patient warming to help keep patients within normal thermia while they're under general anesthetic, which helps improve outcomes and reduce infection. And patient transfer, this one is ever so much closer to production. This is a launch from Spectrum Health Innovation and GVSU. This helps transfer patients from one bed surface to another. And it actually helps reduce hospital-acquired conditions, but in this case, not for patients, but for the workers. Because especially as some of the population is getting larger and larger, you know, pulling them over on a sheet and lifting them up with a few people, that results in some back injuries and so forth. And this helps eliminate that by transferring the patients across from one stretcher to another surface. So as we look forward, negative pressure wound therapy, that's a wound care space that we're into. We've helped develop wound care programs and we manufacture those, and some catheter applications as well. So that's a smattering of a few things that we're involved with, not everything. And now what I'd like to do now is jump into our values. We operate Keystone, we live by 5 key values at Keystone. The first one is ownership. You give us something, a challenge, we take personal accountability, we take ownership for that challenge. The next one is collaborative. We really, truly like to be a part of your team, whether it's a client or a supplier. We tend to shy away from strictly transactional relationships, and we always put our partner, advisor, counselor hat on when we're engaging with clients. The third value is serving with humility. We take on a servant attitude with everything that we're given, and we serve with humility. We like to brag that we're the humblest people on the planet, right? Get it done is the next value. So we have a lot of smart brains here, and we like to innovate and innovate and innovate. However, we always realize that there's commercial timing pressures. And so we like to simplify, cut through the bull, and get it done. It's very critical to keep, have a sense of urgency and get these things done so the products can get out there and create value for the patients and the stakeholders. And last but not least is fun. You know, we are fun to work with and fun to work for. We have a passion for what we do. We often call ourselves engineers. And we've used that phrase so many times that we've actually registered it. So it's trademarked under Keystone now. So feel free to use the term. You just have to write me a check every time you do. So we do take on a holistic approach with everything that we're given. So development, yes, we're very strong in development, in manufacturing, but also strategy. And all of these bubbles overlap in a brand new program. And it's very important to balance and see the interconnection of all of these, because, you know, if you look at your exit strategy, for example, that drives how far you take the development. And if you go into manufacturing, it drives your sales strategy. And we help our clients with all these aspects of their idea. Now we're going to get into our 4 key steps, our proven process. This is discover, define, develop, and deliver. We're going to start with discover. And contrary to what is popular belief, this is not discovering a new material or technology or device. Our clients typically have done that already. This is making that first contact with the client. It's getting to know each other, checking alignment with values and the market. And does this align with our capabilities and mutual goals? Hopefully all of that is a nice green check box. If so, we go into, we decide to go down a path together. We create a proposal. We have a very transparent proposal process, and then we engage with the client. The next step is define. Now, this is a situation where literally it's a sketch on a napkin and none of this work has been done. I can tell you that clients engage us at every stage in the life cycle of their product. Sometimes we get entrepreneurs that come in the door and it literally is nothing more than a sketch. Other times, on the other end of the spectrum, we may take in a manufacturing transfer product that has been in the market for 30 years, and they just want us to take over manufacturing. But in this case, assuming that it's a sketch on a napkin, we can help with voice of customer, marketing claims, all of these things, the regulatory path and IP strategy, help define the product. Once we get through this defined stage, then we can create a updated and improved schedule and budget and provide an updated proposal as well. Then we get into the really fun engineering stuff, the ideation, the concepts, the design, analysis, testing. We have a test lab that sometimes looks like a Mythbusters episode based on what we're doing out there. We have an FDA compliant, a very robust milestone review process and design history file creation process. At times, we also help our clients with field validation efforts as well. And then we get into deliver. And this has actually become the largest part of our business over the last, I would say, 6-7 years. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of kitting. We do a lot of light assembly. We have several clean rooms now in controlled environments ranging from class 5 to class 8. We are experts at sterile barrier packaging, ranging from the lower volume band bar and vacuum sealing to higher volume like a form fill seal machine. And also we provide warehousing and distribution for certain clients. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. This is more visual of what we just went through, but here's a picture of our facility. You can see some contract manufacturing in action there. We do product development, experts at sterilization, large sourcing database. We provide distribution. There's a picture in the upper left of the form fill seal, one of our form fill seal lines. It's a high-speed packaging machine that makes packaging on the fly. We do assembly and adhesive bonding. We are a RoHS compliant electromechanical wiring and soldering. Class 5 assembly for some of the implant work that we do. Class 8 assembly and packaging. Band bar and tray sealing, auto bagging. We are experts at labeling as well, and with all the UDID codes and all the other criteria that have changed and evolved over the last few years, this is a key aspect to getting a product out the door. End of line testing, not only do we perform it on electromechanical programs, but we often design and build the end of line test fixtures ourselves and systems. We do some plastic laser welding as well in-house. And then the rest of these you see here are more for what we call our AQL level production ongoing testing for packaging and sterile barrier seals, like burst testing, bubble leak, peel testing. We have a very high-end vision system for inspection of parts, dye penetration. And again, we're heavy into product design, development testing. We do a lot of computer simulations, whether it's structural, heat transfer, fluid flow. We do have 3D printing capabilities. We provide some regulatory consulting. I always qualify this as that we're regulatory light. We can help, but we always refer our clients to an actual regulatory group, much like that Gene has there with Intubing, or regulatory attorneys, depending on what their needs are. We can nudge them in certain directions, but we don't take them across the goal line necessarily with the 510K submittals. We're very strong in documentation, design history files, and so forth. We have a brand new ERP system that we just launched. We are a traction company, which is a whole nother presentation someday if we want to talk about that. It's a really cool system that's helped us tighten our ship over the years. Here's our certificate for ISO. We're FDA registered, a very robust quality system, and FDA compliant design controls. So how can we help you? How can we help our clients? We love our passion is to get your idea from dream to distribution. We'll always be advisors and partners in your initiatives, responsive and scalable. It's one of the nice things about not being tied to any one raw material conversion process, where assembly and packaging and so forth, we can scale up very, very quickly. More and more as our customer database has grown, we're a source for new products and new product ideas for our clients. Now, typically they bring us the new ideas. However, as we look at interconnections between our potential clients, there's a lot of more and more we can make those connections where they can group their products together. And like I mentioned before, warehousing and distribution and many other possibilities. So I went through that very, very quickly so we could have some time for our next subject, but that's our general overview of Keystone.
Jim, that's great. Thank you for taking us through that. We actually have a question here already. How does your expertise fit into products that consist of hardware and software for development into the final product? I think that's targeted towards, do you guys do software?
Yeah, so we're very, very software light. So we're primarily mechanical here. However, we do develop and work on a number of electromechanical products. And I'll say we're equipped enough, smart enough to create software specs and do the documentation for software. We do not write embedded code or any of that. We outsource the software work.
Great, that's from Robin. Another question here coming in, Jim, any plans to do clinical lab robotics design and development? I'm not sure I fully understand that question. Maybe the asker could clarify, unless it makes sense to you, Jim. Any plans to do clinical lab robotics design and development?
Today, that's one thing. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. No, after you.
Yeah, one thing I can safely say, we have not done that in the past. So that's not a space that we have played in, if I understand the question.
And again, if the questioner wants to clarify that, they can do that. Can you help develop lab robots? I'm sorry, can you help labs develop robots for lab testing? I think it's like automated lab testing when we want to increase the throughput. Do you guys do that kind of thing, like automation for laboratory automation?
So we do have a systems engineering group here. However, it's basically dedicated to internal automated equipment and so forth. Actually, as the years have evolved, we used to provide, I will say, design of machines and fabrication of machines and so forth. We're much more now a product-based company. So it's not a service that we necessarily provide to the outside world anymore. But if you need that help, I can make some connections as well.
Yeah, great. Good questions. Thank you. Thank you both for the questioners. So Jim, I'm going to welcome our Director of Product Development, Aaron Kerrer, on here as well as we bridge this discussion into design for manufacturing. There's Aaron. Welcome, Aaron.
Hey. Hey, Jim. Hey, Gene.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Well, I think, Jim, when you get a client and they know they're asking for development help, right? You mentioned FDA design controls, and you're walking them through that process. And I know that you come to companies like Keystone into being, and you admit that you need to do development. Hey, Keystone's going to take you through design for manufacturability. You're going to be thinking about what's coming down the road, right? You know the processes that could be applicable to this. You know the kinds of hiccups that happen down the road, and you're going to walk people through that. Our business, we do the same kind of thing. But I got to believe that there's any number of companies, and let's start with the startups. I want to talk about both startups and established companies with respect to design for manufacturability. But what are some of the most common things that when a startup, a new product development effort that's never been a company before, when they come to you, what are some of the most common design for manufacturability areas that you have to educate them on and tell them, okay, hold up, guys, we got to think about these? Sure,
yeah. And I could probably go on for a couple of hours on this subject, and I'm sure you can as well, and so can Aaron. I'll throw out one thing, so I'll just pick and choose, but one thing that's become more and more prevalent is, I'm going to pick on 3D printing for a minute, okay? 3D printing is amazing, and it is awesome, and it's a great resource, and it's improved over the years. It can also create a situation where these startups and entrepreneurs, they'll print out a part that is wonderful and beautiful and structurally sound, and it does the fluid flow, it does whatever function it's supposed to do, and there's no way in the world you could ever manufacture it. There may be recessed pockets or undercuts, or the wall thicknesses may be so thin or too thick, and so there's a dynamic that's happened over the years where we'll sometimes have a startup come in and place a 3D printed thing on the table, and the perception is they're done. It's ready to go. Can you just help us finalize a few things? And then that's where we have to diplomatically break the news to them that there's a lot of work to be done here, not only on DFM, but also DHF and all these other things. So that's one aspect, is these additive manufacturing processes have been great for the design cycle frequency. However, it doesn't negate the need for a design for manufacturing, because you can create a lot of parts in 3D printing that you could never ever produce any other way, right? So that's a thing, and that's often even at the component level. Let me jump to the assembly level now, because a lot of devices aren't just one piece or one part, they're an assembly, right? And it's one thing to make a prototype, an assembly that they all goes together because it's all custom fit, type of things. But a big factor that comes into play are dimensional stack ups and tolerances and all that good stuff. Because now if you want to make tens of thousands of these a month, guess what? All of them need to snap together, screw together, go together. And if there hasn't been a thorough analysis of all of the tolerances and the dimensional stack ups from a diametrical standpoint, axial standpoint, and all of that, you can end up with a big pile of things that won't go together. So that's another aspect that we run across quite a bit. And then, so backing off from 3D printing and even assembly just for a second, a general knowledge of the capabilities of manufacturing processes, which is whether it's machining, injection molding, extrusion, sheet metal bending, any of these things, they all have their pros and cons, and they all have their limitations. And having a keen awareness and knowledge of those things not only helps you get into a situation where the parts will be manufacturable in the first place, but also if you can optimize that, optimize the parts based on that knowledge, they can be affordable. Especially I'll talk to machined parts and to some extent injection molded parts. Don't get me wrong, with today's CAD and ultra precision, computers and everything, I mean, we can design parts that are plus or minus, 10 thousandths of an inch, tolerance. And guess what? Actually, the machine shops can make those parts too. Now they may cost 20 times what they really need to cost. So that's where the bang for the buck comes in with design for manufacturing, is on the component level. It helps you with the lifetime cost of this product. And that's important. It's not just a one-off. So every little bit you save in that beginning. So let's say there's a huge program and you propose to the client, hey, if you spend $100,000 with us on just design for manufacturing, we'll save you millions of dollars for the life cycle of this program, right? Another one that we run across, and I'm going to pick on fasteners for a second, and choose fasteners as screws, nuts, bolts, clips, any type of fastener consistency. We're actually going through a product right now that I don't even know. I'm going to say it's got 30 different types of fasteners in it. And they're all about the same size, and they're all do about the same load carrying and so forth and so on. But you got to have a whole toolbox, to take this thing apart. So fastener consistency is a big one for DFM. I'm sure if any of you guys are do it yourself or have done home projects and you've taken apart some things and you're like, why is this a hex head? And this is a Phillips, and this is a sheet metal screw, and this is so that makes a big impact on the design as well. So there's a handful of areas that we run.
Those are some great examples, and I think some of the latter ones there that you talked about, like the fasteners, are really interesting when it comes to assembly, because oftentimes people can think, okay, I got this component working well, but it is those tolerance stack ups. It's those fastener consistency choices that are going to give you headaches down the road. One of the things that we often say within our group is something like 5-10K is halfway. And oftentimes companies don't realize I can get out there. And is it hard to get FDA clearance? Yes, it is. But you can get it. And then there's still a myriad things that all have to do with manufacturing and readiness for manufacturing. Now, some of those are validation and other things that aren't really related to DFM so much. But there's so much that gets encountered when you try to start ramping, and were you really ready? And some of those things that you mentioned were part of it. Let me give you a hypothetical though, Jim. So let's say I'm a company and I say, I want to pour it all on. I want to optimize these parts. I remember an example I often use is a group that we ran into one time that they had dumped money into building 4 cavity steel tooling, but they didn't actually know that the part worked for their assembly.
Oh, wow.
And they had already built 4 cavity steel tooling at $150,000. And it's always stood out to me as a negative example. But I'm sure you run into clients too, where it's like, okay, just tell me what it takes. We're going to optimize these parts. We're going to make it all exactly right. But something in the back of your head is telling you, are you really ready to put that in? Are you really ready to put that time in on the tolerance analyses for volume? Do you even know if this thing really works? How do you navigate that? When is the right time to start doing hardcore DFM?
Yeah, and I'm going to say that's a tough one from a customer expectation standpoint, right? And because, like I mentioned earlier, because of the rapid prototyping that we can do and the rapid progress we can make from a visual standpoint and even functional now, it's a double-edged sword, because everyone can get excited, like, look, we have an assembly. Actually, it works and everything else. But in the real manufacturing world, you're a long way off. So we try to encourage DFM efforts as early as possible. Unfortunately, we don't always win that battle. And the reason is because the timing and cost visibility isn't quite there yet. So as you know, when you're in the early stages of development, you don't have a finely tuned costed BOM, right? You've got some good sort of gut checks and things like that. So, and it's almost a good and bad if that initial gut check falls within the target costs of what they might, think it should be, because then that sort of deflates the sales a little bit. Well, why do this huge DFM exercise if we're already, at our target cost and so forth? So that is challenging. So again, that you got to put that diplomat hat on and that advisor counselor hat on, like we talk about. And I'll tell you, budget constraints are always there, right? At least most of the time, 90% of the time they're there, right? But the timing is there too. So if you've been going down this path of development for weeks or months, and then you come to the table to the client and say, look, yes, we can save you X thousands or millions of dollars, what have you. We just got to crank through this DFM exercise, and it may take another 6 to 8 weeks. You get what I call the stinky eye sometimes. The budget is one thing, but it's the time frame that it takes. But that's where you really have to be an effective communicator at, yes, you're front loading this with some work, and it's going to take an estimated couple months or whatever. But the time and cost savings, again, for the life cycle of the product is, sometimes immeasurable because it's so significant, right? So it's, to answer your question, it's when is the right time, as early as possible, with a caveat that let's make sure the design is frozen. So don't spin the wheels a lot with DFM until you're pretty sure, I'll say from a macro sense, the design is frozen, because actually DFM is going to help drive some design nuances in and of itself, right? But if the thing is mostly baked, right, and mostly there, now's a good time to get into DFM before you start cutting tools loose, assembly lines, and all that good stuff. So,
yeah, there's a ditch on both sides of this, right? You can do it too early because the design's not really working, But then if you don't do it later, you're building a product that's costing you too much, it's too hard to make, that really isn't ready for manufacturing. I think that's wise. So give me a little distinction here, though, because we're talking now about startups. But I remember I always thought that big companies always had it all together.
Mm-hmm.
And as time went on in our business, designing and developing, I realized, well, that's not always true. Is there any distinction in your mind between the design for manufacturability issues brought to the table by startups who obviously haven't been exposed to much of this at all, and they need to learn it, and that's why we do things like this? What about larger companies? Do you feel like when they come to you for manufacturing services, do they have the DFM generally done, or are they coming to you asking for that help, or are you having to tell them, hey guys, this isn't really there?
Yeah, I've seen it across the board. So I'm going to generalize a little bit. I'm going to call it sensitivity. So the startups are far more sensitive, and there's a stronger reaction to the concept, the cost, and the timing of DFM, right? Some of them do appreciate it. Some of them, I'm sure they all appreciate it, but may not be well-grounded because they haven't been through the process before to, cut it loose and really dive into it. But the large companies, I will say, I've seen the spectrum as well. And a lot of it, again, comes down to commercial timing pressures. So we may see some low-hanging fruit. We may see some things that need to be done, but can save a lot of cost. However, because it's a recent acquisition or there's a trade show coming up, any plethora of reasons, they may understand it, they may appreciate it, but there may be some pressures that say, okay, we get it, but not for this launch. We're going to go MVP, we're going to go expensive, we're going to go, and let's do a proposal for, 6 months from now or a year from now, and we'll dive into the DFM. So I've seen it across the board. It's typically driven by sales and marketing and commercial timing pressures. I'll simplify and say it's doing it right or right now, type of thing. That's always the challenge with whether it's big or small companies.
Yeah, no, so that's a great way to say it, and to be sensitive that all of it matters, but when you do it is up for discussion there.
Right.
What about this question that we're seeing so much these days? Of course, ethylene oxide sterilization kind of on the outs, lots of challenges. When you think about sterilization that you mentioned earlier as a part of the manufacturing process, how are you guys thinking about designing for that? Because I think listeners of the show will have heard before, different sterilization methods are appropriate for different types of materials, for different types of products, different costs, different volumes. How do you guys think about this today?
Yeah, so I'm going to touch on that on a few levels. The actual aspect of EO, the political aspect of EO, and the alternatives to EO. So first, the installed base, okay? So ethylene oxide, I believe, accounts for 60% of all things sterilized, something like that. And that's a lot of devices. The other 40 is split up amongst gamma. Gamma is the lion's share of the remaining percentage. And then you have E-beam and parasitic and steam. Sometimes you can do steam and so forth. But let's just touch on EO for a minute, because we do a lot. We manage a lot of EO sterilization, and we've been burned. A couple of years ago, I get a text from a client that lives in the Chicago area. We were doing work with Sterigenics there, the Willowbrook plant, and there was a news clip that showed the chains on the doors. They're shut down because of the emissions, and we were running 13 pallets of product a week through that sterilizer, and now we're running 0. And as you know about sterilization, you don't just walk into another sterilizer and say, hey, I got this load of stuff, can you clean it for me? There's validations and there's a lot of work. One of my business advisors, I have an advisory board, actually has from scratch designed and built sterilizers. EO has been in the medical device world since the 70s and has seen this EO cycle, no pun intended, through several decades. Okay. And right now we're in a hotbed type political EO mess, right? The sterilizers are being shut down. There's concerns of cancer and pollution and things like that. He has seen this cycle 3 or 4 times, and then it quiets down and everybody goes back to business as usual. Is that going to happen this time? We don't know. But I don't anticipate the installed base of EO is going to disappear in the short term. There's, quite frankly, it's very, very effective as a process. It sterilizes probably literally millions of devices every day or every hour, maybe. You're not going to replace that process overnight. It's going to take many, many years. The pollution controls are getting better and better. And of course, along with that, the monitoring of the pollution is getting better and better too. But the risks of EO are sometimes overblown. I'm not going to sit here as like an expert witness, to EO gas, but as I'm sitting here talking, I'm emitting ethylene oxide gas, and cars that drive by on the highways, they're emitting a lot of ethylene oxide gas, the byproducts and so forth. And when you compare the numbers between big facilities and some of these other emitters, the science shows, what the true emissions really are. But what's happened too over the years is sterilizers that were once built in remote areas all of a sudden found themselves in the middle of a subdivision or in the middle of a highly populated area just because of population growth. And that's some of what you're seeing there as well. But we do get more and more questions about alternative sterilization methods. And we try to stay cognizant of them that are out there. And, gamma is a strong one. Gamma is good. But like you said, you simply can't use gamma for certain plastics. It will destroy or discolor the resin. And so you're stuck with something else. Now you can go with something like an E-beam. There's a lot of E-beam going on out there, but you really have to do some serious DFM there because a lot of that is line of sight. So they're going to improve that continually, but it's like shining a light, right? It's E-beam. So you've got to shine it in lots of directions or create parts that are less susceptible to that direction. I don't know if that answers your question, but we deal with sterilization every day, so I could go on and on.
So it's great. It's great, Jim. And in fact, it's one of the things that I think as we talk about manufacturing and we're exposing companies to these ideas of there's some things you're going to have to think about here in concert with your manufacturing team. A lot of times people may not think, hey, these semi-political ramifications of what chemicals are we allowed to use play a direct upstream effect on what materials did I decide to put into my product, which then has all to do with performance and readiness and everything else, like we were talking last week on the show. And you can't just take a cut mold and decide to change the plastic that you're putting into it. It was built with the shrink in mind of that. And so I think what you're shining light on is some of the considerations that have to happen before you just pull the trigger and say, yeah, we're manufacturing a plastic sterile product. And it's really important to think about.
Yeah.
We're getting towards the top of the hour. I want to get to some of the questions that our audience has asked here, largely about Keystone, but I'm going to start with the one that's a little bit more esoteric. And our questioner here said, with your experience, how do you support or deal with newer, young engineers where there are gaps in their DFM knowledge?
Yeah, so I can tell you that, and we do hire quite a few young engineers out of college. A lot of great universities around here, GVSU, Western Michigan University. That's where I graduated from, U of M, Michigan State, Michigan Tech. We've hired folks from all of those, and excellent programs. They're all accredited. They're great. Especially when it comes to DFM, where I see where it's light. I'm going to go back to stack ups and tolerances. I'd be willing to bet we throw the curriculums up on the screen of every one of those universities. And I bet you'd be hard pressed to find anything around, or very, very, very little. Definitely not a course in stack ups and tolerances and that sort of thing. And you simply can't effectively design assemblies without knowing how everything stacks up. An automatic transmission is a good example. I've heard that, all the cars, most of the cars today have automatic transmissions. From one end of that transmission to another, there's thousands of components. And by the way, they all literally stack up, right? There's clutch plates and gears and all these things. And they're all made to tenths of a thousandth of an inch tolerance. But because there are so many, the insides of that transmission can vary by over an eighth of an inch, sometimes 200 thousandths of an inch, because it all stacks up, right? And they really don't walk students through that very, very well, I would say. So that's something that we do a lot of training here. And I could see where there'd be benefit in increasing the coursework in the actual practical limitations of raw material conversion processes like machining, like extrusion, like injection molding. There's some knowledge that comes out of the programs, but it's definitely not as strong as you'd like to see to jump into a DFM project right away.
Yeah, no, that's well said. We see the same sort of thing. Here's another one. When you say distribution, this is referring back to what Keystone does in terms of distribution. Are you able to do marketing and sales for med devices? Or are you talking about logistics and delivery to the customer? How far do you, you and I have talked on the show so many times about those marketing issues and readiness to address the user's needs and stuff, but where does your business come up to? What do you do for the business?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's evolved over the years. So I will still say, our biggest footprint is contract manufacturing. So we manufacture these devices for a client. It goes out the door with their name on it. Now, in some cases, they would just assume that we warehouse and fulfill the orders directly to their clients, which might be the hospitals, and we can do that. So I say that's not sales and marketing for the client. It's simply the order fulfillment and keeping the finished goods in stock, right? On the other end of that spectrum, we have more and more now, like with the COVID collection kits, and there are some other products that they're under the Keystone brand. And they're under the Keystone brand because we chose to get into that market ourselves, or they're under the Keystone brand because the client, they may have came up with the IP, they may have developed, they may have the 510K and all these things, but they just want to get out there and sell it themselves, right? And we kind of fill that gap for them, where we're basically like the specification developer. We are the specification developer from a regulatory standpoint, but they go out and they sell and market the product. And we have sort of a hybrid model as well. So we've to tailor our services to meet the needs that we've seen. We've sort of come up with different flavors from one end of the spectrum of strictly contract manufacturing, all the way over to being basically the specification developer. Now, on top of that, I think this question had sales, marketing, and commercialization. So can we help people commercialize their products and get it out there and sell it? If you ask that question literally a year to 2 years ago, I'd say, yeah, it's not really us. I mean, it's really on the customer to get out there and sell. But I will say through our government channels and some of the other resources that we've added, more and more, we're able to give a nod to certain products and say, you know what, we understand you need a sales channel, you need help with that. We can help commercialize some of these products. Is it the center of our wheelhouse as we sit here today? No, but it's something we are starting to do more and more.
Worth having the discussion when it comes up. One more quick question here, and this one has to do with who can come to you and chat with you. Obviously, there's a lot of startups. If it's a product company and they've been on the market and they're saying, "Can you manufacture our new product line?" It's kind of a no-brainer. But how about the startups and they say, "I don't have money today. I want to work with you, but I need some kind of a proposal to give to my investors to say this is what it's going to cost. I need the money, but I got to get the money somehow." How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so Oftentimes, we've even helped with their pitches or our proposals, because our proposals are so detailed and in-depth, they become part of, I'm not going to say that necessarily the business plan, but they do become part of the pitch deck in some cases. So we do help at those at that level. We also, because we work with so many startups and early stage companies, we're well connected with all levels of financing options that are around, ranging from banks to angels to private equity to venture capital. You know, we have a lot of connections in that arena, and we can connect them to those resources. I will tell you, there's a big demarcation between pre-revenue funding availability and you're already in revenue. You know, there's a big dichotomy there, but we can help advise through that. In some very, I would say fairly rare cases, but we also at times have provided discounts on our services in return for equity in that startup. We have 4 or 5 that we're into right now. It helps reduce their costs. Helps us, you know, it's a risk buy, but helps us get an equity play. And then it just exemplifies that we truly are partners with them. So.
That's an important aspect, I think, to viably work in these kinds of areas. You have to partner with your clients. I like how you said earlier, we generally shy away from transactional business. If it's just take a dollar and do the thing, like, no, we want to make you successful. I think in our businesses, we share that kind of a mentality. I want to give just a second for any other questions to come in. If anyone needs a question here, to raise your hand or to type it into the Q&A. We are at the top of the hour, so we'll be closing down here in just a second. But Jim, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being on here and all you do. Again, a judge for the pitch party. We thank you for your independence in that, so that the pitch party can go on. We really appreciate that. And thanks for being here to talk about DFM today.
Absolutely. I appreciate being invited and being a part of this. This has been a great forum ever since, I'm going to say, all this craziness started, right?
All the craziness, and we'll just keep it going and we'll have fun with it. And it's a great way for the community to connect and learn about each other. I think one of the things we hear over and over from folks is people just don't know who's out there and what they do. And so just to have these chats, it's always been so fun and so encouraging. So I thank you for being here today. Thank you, Aaron Kerr, our Director of Product Development, for being my backup today. We didn't know how the signal was going to work from my perch here out west, but it worked, and I always appreciate Aaron being there and all of his thoughts. Hey, we're going to see y'all next week for the rest of August. We are talking manufacturing all the month of August. I will see you next Friday, August 27th. And for today, thanks for being here on MedTech Crossroads. We appreciate all of you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.